These are some of the tools you'll need. Definitely have lots of clamps on hand. I did not mention that earlier, and that was an omission. Get as many clamps as you can afford or borrow, beg, or steal. You'll also need your screw gun, 1-inch screws, and lots of glue. So let's begin with step one. I want to talk to you real quickly again about laying out the whole project. As you can see here in front of me, I took the 4x8 sheet, laid it out, and then I took the cut piece, and I would recommend you use a table saw with this, and set that next to the 4x8. All of this is just on your standard sawhorses that you can get anywhere. And then of course the end piece is down there situated the same. The goal here is going to be to take these 1x4 pieces of pine and screw and glue them onto the longest parts of the flag. As you guys know, they call it a 1x4, but the actual dimension is 3/4 inches by 3.5 inches. So again, when you look at the depth of these, are about 3.5 by 3/4 inch. The kind of screw that we're going to put in there is just your standard. You can go to a lumber yard and get these. They're essentially a 1-inch either wood screw or drywall screw. What I'm going to ask you though, because that's 3/4 of an inch, is you're going to have to recess this a little bit, and you'll see that when you press it into this pine, that's easy to do. So step one is gluing it. Let's go ahead and glue it. So like I've talked about, don't worry about some of these anomalies that you may find on the edge, but always try to get the straightest lumber that you can, and I assure you that will serve you later. So always be generous with your glue when you're putting it on. And remember that once you glue it on, have a wet rag with you at all times so you can clean off your edges, okay? And it's at this time we're going to go ahead now and flip this onto the board. As we've talked about, I've already glued the entire underside of this piece of pine, and now I'm just going to clamp it down. Remember, the screws just kind of keep this lumber in place until that glue dries. Make sure you get it as flush as you can and clamp down the glue, or the board rather. If glue does squeege out, just go ahead and wipe that off with your wet rag that I said you should have. Now remember, this first piece is what we're gluing, and then we're also going to put this second piece on. You'll notice here that on most lumber you have factory edges. That's where that red paint is. Try to match all your red paint to red paint, red paint to red paint to red paint. That gives you a really clean edge. Again, when you cut these two ancillary pieces, I hope you're using a table saw if you have access to one. If not, that jig that you made, that'll help you cut these nice and square as well. The pine is generally soft enough that you don't have to pre-drill all your holes, although feel free to do that if you want to do that. I'm just going to go straight through. I always hold off that end about 1 inch or 2, because if you get too close to the edge, you'll invariably split this pine. So again, this is really just to hold it down. So I want to get it started, get it here, and instead of going flush, I'm going to press on this and countersink it down in a little bit. I want to take about 1/8 to 1/4 inch in there to get a nice solid grip. Make sure you run your finger under here and try to avoid having the tip coming out on the front side. Now with this, you can just go about every 6 inches to a foot all the way and run it down the full length of the board. And as you can see, you just may have to wipe off that glue as it comes out as you go. And don't be too concerned about that, because we're going to be cutting this back a little bit for a nice straight edge. You'll notice what I did here is I held these off a little bit, because you're going to be cutting back about 1/2 inch on these. So make sure that your screw on the outboard side is about 1 inch in. In fact, I'm going to readjust this one because I think it's a little too close to the edge. So what you'll notice here is that I'm countersinking these again. And I'm also using a pattern that kind of offsets itself. Again, don't get too wrapped up in this. We're not building a piano, but you want to go maybe about 6 to 8, 9 inches off of each one, foot, somewhere in that area. And then you just kind of rotate back and forth. Remember, the idea is to hold the wood down while the glue is drying, because that's what really holds the wood down. The first top of the edge has already been completed, and now we're going to affix the bottom side. This side's already been glued and clamped, and now I'm going to just add all the screws to it. Okay, now we're going to put on the end piece.